My husband refused to forgive me due to a misunderstanding and divorced me. 9 years later, he discovered the truth and showed up at my doorstep. I, 38F, got divorced from my ex-husband Nick, 40M, almost 9 years ago. We'd been married for some time, but due to a huge misunderstanding, he left me and then served me with divorce papers a few days later. He didn't even give me a chance to explain, so he never found out the truth. I was so hurt by the fact that he decided to leave so fast that I didn't contest the divorce either and let him go. I used to be a housewife. Then one day, Nick came back home to find my ex-boyfriend Joe, 38M, in the house with me. He turned around and left without a word. The three of us knew each other from college, and Joe and I had dated for just 3 months before I realized I had feelings for Nick. Joe had been visiting to invite me and Nick to his wedding that was going to take place in a few months, and that was it. Nothing weird or suspicious was going to happen. I'd never do that to someone else, but Nick just assumed the worst and left without a word. I tried to call after him and stop him, but he drove away as fast as he could and even blocked me everywhere, so I couldn't get to him and explain what was going on. I didn't even know where he was and spent the next 2 days sobbing and panicking. Joe had also tried to get through to Nick to explain, but even he'd been blocked. I was devastated but believed that once his anger cooled off, Nick would come back, and I'd explain everything to him so that we could resume our normal lives once more. Unfortunately, that didn't happen, and a few days later, he filed for divorce. I was devastated by that and didn't know what to do. I just needed a chance to explain everything to him, but he didn't think I was worthy of it. With a heavy heart, I decided not to fight for my marriage anymore and let him go. I didn't contest the divorce. Once the proceedings started, I packed my stuff up and moved in with a friend for a while until I got a job and could afford a place of my own. It took a while, but I got my life back on track and didn't give myself any time to sit around and be depressed about what was happening. I was angry about Nick's behavior and will always be. I deserved a second chance or at least the chance to explain, but even after so many years of being together, he didn't think I deserved it. I felt betrayed and hurt, but I knew I had to look out for myself now. So, I got a job and eventually moved into an apartment of my own. By then, my divorce had been finalized as well, and even though I didn't get much out of it, I was content. I just wanted to move on with my life, and that's what I was doing. I also attended Joe's wedding a month after my own divorce and had a blast reconnecting with my old friends from college. Nick had skipped it just as I'd expected, and most people were shocked to learn that Nick and I had parted ways. All of them had expected us to stay together forever, as had I, but life had other plans. Attending Joe's wedding turned out to be the best decision I'd ever made, though, because there I met Chris, 40M, the man I'm currently married to and even have a daughter with. We had a conversation at Joe's wedding, and I did feel sparks instantly, but I held back since I'd just been through a divorce and wanted to work on myself before I rushed into anything else. I wanted a break from men, so I exchanged numbers with him but didn't text for a while. A year later, I was finally in a better place mentally and felt ready to date. As luck would have it, I ran into Chris yet again at a work event since we work in the same field, and I finally agreed to go out on a date with him. 2 years later, we were getting married, and another year in, we even had a daughter who's almost 5 years old now. A lot of time has passed since my divorce with Nick, and I'm a brand new person now. So you can imagine my shock when, after all this time, Nick shows up at my doorstep out of the blue. That happened a few days ago, and I'm still reeling from the shock of it all. I don't know how he found me, and neither did I bother to find out later on because I truly couldn't care less. It was the weekend, so my husband and I were both at home with our daughter when the bell rang. I was stunned when I saw Nick standing outside with a bouquet of roses and smiling as if nothing had happened. Before I could even process what was happening, he started talking and explained that a few weeks ago he'd learned from a friend that Joe was married to a different woman and not me, and he'd finally realized that he'd overreacted back then. He said he wanted to give us a second chance, and so he was back here asking for forgiveness for whatever he'd done. I had no idea what to say to him. I mean, it was ridiculous enough that he divorced me over a misunderstanding all those years back without bothering to find out the truth, but now he was back after 9 whole years of no contact, believing that he could just talk his way back into my life and get a second chance just like that when he himself had denied me that very second chance. Fat chance of that happening. He kept talking while I silently stared at him, trying to think of what to do next. I so desperately wanted to shut the door in his face, but that just wouldn't be humiliating enough. So, I decided to do something a lot more insulting. I told him to wait right there and went back to the living room where my husband and my daughter were sitting, waiting for me to come back. I didn't have time to explain, so I just lifted my daughter in my arms and told Chris to follow me to the front door. You can imagine what happened after that. Nick was horrified when he saw me walk towards him with my daughter in my arms and my husband behind me. I smiled at him and told him that he was a tad bit too late to ask for a second chance now and asked him to get out. After a second of silence, he turned around, ran to his car without another word, and drove away. I was really pleased with myself, and I finally felt like I got the closure I'd been looking for all those years ago. Once he was gone, I sat Chris down, and when I told him that it was Nick and what he'd said to me, we ended up having a good laugh over it. Nick was in over his head if he had really believed that I was just going to take him back, no questions asked, after what he'd done to me 9 years ago. I didn't even know why he thought it would be a good idea to just spring this surprise on me without doing his own research first. One look at any of my social media accounts would tell him that I was now married and even had a daughter, but I guess he couldn't get through since I have private accounts everywhere. Even then, he could have asked our old friends and tried to find out what I was up to. Chris believes that Nick's so self-centered that he must have assumed that I would have waited around for him after he'd left, hoping that he'd come back someday. It sounds like a pretty spot-on assessment of his character, even though Chris has never even had a conversation with Nick.